cop who put his badge on the line for justice.
You know the name Doug Poppa?
Yes, I do. God bless Doug Poppa, an honest cop.
I was elated, of course, but then as he testified, I was somewhat concerned for him, because I knew that they were probably going to crucify that man.
Sometimes the truth has a price. That may be the lesson of a Virginia police officer who says, in trying to do the right thing, he ended up paying for it.
The message you're sending is, see, we did it, Doug. You don't come out, you don't buck the system. No matter what the reason is, you just can basically keep your mouth shut. But if I wouldn't do it all over again, I would take the badge and I would leave it on somebody's desk and get out of police work. Because the day I can't tell the truth because somebody's pressuring me, and the day the system doesn't want me to tell the truth because somebody's pressuring me, is the day I'd leave the badge on the desk and walk away.
Poppa was fired for insubordination. One man who confronted truth and consequences.
From Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Doug Poppa, Truth and Consequences Podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, episode 107, 23:36 hours, Thursday, March 31st, 2022. Hang on one second, let me get this thing going. Okay, get rid of that box. Okay, here we go. Listen, the last couple of podcasts had to do with Undersheriff Kevin McMahill, who's one of the candidates running for Clark County Sheriff, which would put him in charge, like I said, of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. So, last two or three episodes about McMahill, the 1995 incident with Carrie Lance, the woman who we told, let me see your vagina, the other officer standing with them, William Stoops, asked her to eat rock cocaine. There was another female officer there, Jennifer Clampett. McMahill stood by. McMahill's the one running for sheriff, ladies and gentlemen, not anybody else. Stood by, didn't stop William Stoops from forcing the woman to eat the crack cocaine. So what I got going on here is the other day, the Nevada Independent, it's an online news outlet based out of Las Vegas. They conducted an interview with Sheriff Joe Lombardo. They posted it, and I believe it took place the same day on March 30th, which was yesterday or the day before. And in a minute, I'm going to play an excerpt of that. It's only about 7 minutes long. But what you're going to hear them talk about is they talk about a lot of politics and stuff that I'm not getting into because I'm concerned right now is why is Sheriff Lombardo, well, I answer my own question when I say why. Sheriff Lombardo is continuing to defend Kevin McMahill, his former undersheriff. He supported him when he came out, and actually Kevin McMahill said in a fundraiser several times that he had no intention of running for sheriff until about March of 2021, when Sheriff Lombardo told him he was not going to run for re-election. He was going to go for the position of campaign for governor of Nevada, and that if Kevin ran, he would support Kevin. So that's what happened. And he supports him. And like I said, Kevin gets all the money from the businesses and the casinos, and which has been going on for decades out here. Incumbent sheriff supports the person. That person gets all the money, the recognition from the local businesses and the casinos. So again, Joe Lombardo, corrupt, documented liar, and incompetent, in my opinion. And I've called him that. And he is. He's a documented liar, and he's corrupt because he engaged in multiple cover-ups while he was sheriff and even before. And he's defending, still, Kevin McMahill, the documented liar, documented pervert. According to Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department records, internal affairs records, they sustained the charges on Kevin McMahill, I'm going to say that again, on the 1995 incident with Carrie Lance. Show me your vagina. They confirmed that. He was sustained on the charges of conduct unbecoming an officer, neglect of duty, and being untruthful. Was deceptive on the polygraph, deemed untruthful. Those 3 charges were sustained, and I'm going to keep saying this. Those charges were sustained. Nothing else happened with those charges. They were sustained. He was not cleared of anything. And now you're going to hear on this interview, I want to play a little clip of this interview. And again, in that interview, you're going to hear Sheriff Lombardo. I'm endorsing still Kevin McMahill. And he goes on to say, I'm just going to give some snippets before I play it, that he was working in a different department during Metro, different unit back when this happened, and basically that he didn't know anything about it. He has nothing specific about the investigation. He said he heard rumors. There was discussions about it, but he believed that McMahill's name had been cleared by going through Metro's internal affairs process. That's what he's thinking. That is his opinion, ladies and gentlemen. And then he said, quote, in that article, in that interview that you'll see here in a couple of minutes, he, meaning McMahill, was put through the process, meaning the internal affairs investigation and the process that came out of the pre-termination hearing and everything else. He, meaning McMahill, survived the process. He was determined exonerated as part of that situation. That's what Lombardo said. And you're going to hear him say that in his own words, okay? And then they're going to talk about the records going back then. And you're going to hear him say that he thinks the records were purged, that he can't get them, or he didn't even look for them, okay? Now, listen to the video, watch and listen to the video, and I'm going to have more comments on it, because you ask yourself when you're watching his movements, the way he's talking, he's a nervous wreck. Does that look like the man that you want running the state of Nevada? Because I don't even think he should, as far as I'm concerned, he should have been running the the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. But listen to what he's saying, and keep in mind when he's talking that he is the highest ranking law enforcement officer in Clark County, Nevada. And watch what he says, and then I'll come back with some more comments.
So you're supporting Kevin McMahill in his bid for sheriff.
This is not going to be a tough question.
Oh, great. So I don't know how much the viewers are aware of it, but I know that you must be aware of it. So recently it came to light, there were allegations about 3 decades ago of misconduct by McMahill and another officer, and a recommendation at that time by a superior officer that they both be removed from the force, but only one of them left, and McMahill remained. What do you remember about what happened with all that back then? And then explain why you're supporting him, why you think he's the best man to fill your shoes.
So let me start it with this way. One is I am fully endorsing Kevin McMahill, and I haven't swayed from that, and I will continue to endorse him. 2 is I don't remember anything, okay? And I don't mean to be in the context of what Starvos Anstey answered. I don't remember anything because I wasn't associated with that 25 years ago. I worked in a complete different part of the department.
What were you doing back then? Do you mind just saying?
I don't know. I was probably an undercover narcotics detective.
Okay.
If it was 25 years ago. Yeah, that's probably about right.
Okay.
And so I've learned about this, the majority of it here recently, being schooled and educated on it now. But, you hear rumors in the police department or any organization for your entire career. So maybe some ancillary information associated with that reached me at some point, and maybe there were some ancillary discussions about it. But he was not in my chain of command. I was not his supervisor. He's been through, I'm the 3rd sheriff. He's been through since then. So I'm not intimate in the knowledge associated with that. So I know I was going to be asked about this, and so I've educated myself. And one thing I pride myself at LVMPD and in law enforcement in general is we are very responsible in holding our own accountable. We're probably the most proactive in that space out of any industry or any profession in the United States, because people have to have confidence in their police department. They have to have trust in it. Kevin McMahill went through the process. And my understanding is the complainant recanted her story. That's why Kevin McMahill was cleared associated with that. And we move forward 25 more years. The process, he was put through the process, he survived the process, he was determined exonerated as part of that situation, and he has moved on. Discipline is intended to change behavior. He didn't receive discipline, so his behavior was accepted.
So I got two follow-ups in two different directions. So it has been reported that the officer who complained at the time, I don't know that she fully recanted. I think she told two versions of a story, and it's been characterized as the fact that she recanted. But when all this came to light, did you talk to Kevin McMahill about this? Have you two ever spoken about this matter, let's say just within the last month or so?
Yes.
Okay, and what are you willing to tell us about that conversation?
Well, first and foremost, it was an apology on him that they dragged my name into the whole paradigm.
He apologized to you?
Yes, and that his situation dragged my name into the political process. And I told him, no reason to apologize. You went through the process. I have total confidence in our internal process evaluating improper actions by any individual employee within LVMPD. And they determined he was exonerated of that, and he moved forward with his career.
So that's my other question, and it's really just kind of an administrative one, which maybe at the time you probably couldn't answer, but now you probably can. So the one unanswered question in this whole McMahill story that has come up is, how did it come to be that he was recommended for termination by a superior officer? Then the pre-termination hearings occurred. I believe that's the process, where there's a period of hearings and everyone gets to say what they think. Investigation basically is ongoing, and then obviously there's a finding. But because there was a recommendation for termination, I just want to ask you administratively, is there anything fishy about the fact that there was a recommendation of termination and then it just went away? And the Nevada Independent has requested proof, information, documents related to what happened between the recommendation for termination and the decision to not terminate. Can you clarify what was likely the case at that time? In other words, did the supervisor have to pull back his recommendation for termination? Would that have had to have happened, or what's the process?
Well, to that case in particular, I don't know. Actually, I do not know, and I don't want anybody leaving. I don't want me leaving this interview and people saying that's unacceptable, that he doesn't know, that this guy was his undersheriff and he should have known and he should have done his own research associated with that. I don't know. I don't know what the details on that. I haven't done a public records request on that, and I don't believe there's a need for me to do that at this point. Like I said, I have confidence in the process prior to that. But to explain, help you understand the process is, you go through an IAB investigation. IAB does not make a recommendation for discipline. They just present the facts to the chain of command.
Tell the people watching what IAB stands for.
Oh, Internal Affairs Bureau. Okay. They do the internal investigation when there's a complaint alleged against a police officer or even a civilian employee, any employee within the LVMPD. They go through the facts, they determine the facts of the situation, they present the case upon completion of the investigation to a supervisor. The supervisor, based on what they read and what they determine as a base of that reading and talking to the individual investigators, make a recommendation on discipline. If it rises to termination, that will go to the sheriff to say yay or nay, for it to go to the preterm board. And the preterm board makes the recommendation if we continue with the recommendation of termination. So in this case, they may have said, no, it doesn't rise to that level, send it back for alternate discipline. And now I know in Kevin McMahill's case, he ended up in court associated with this. So, if you have binding arbitration, you go to an arbitrator in this case, but in a criminal case, which I believe is the allegation based on this, it will go to a regular court system.
Okay, thanks.
That's what I know about it.
I'm curious. So Kevin McMahill isn't with Metro anymore, correct?
Correct.
You're still the head of Metro, right?
Correct.
Are there records that you could look up to like figure out what has happened here?
Yeah, the only problem with it is I don't know if they've been purged. They're more than likely, because it's 25 years old, they've been purged.
Would you be willing to commit to the voters in Nevada that you'll make an effort to at least ask?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's incumbent upon me to do that, to breed confidence in the system.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever heard anything more idiotic from a police chief or sheriff or commissioner on what they just asked him? He doesn't know much about anything, yet he's saying Kevin McMahill was exonerated. Kevin McMahill, ladies and gentlemen, was not exonerated of anything. He was not terminated. And I have the answer for that, and I'll explain that in another podcast. Okay? Put this up on the screen again. This is the letter that Stavros Anthony sent to then Jerry Keller, Sheriff Jerry Keller, back in 1995. Okay? He's telling him, I recommend termination. That's his supervisor at the area command, the Southeast Area Command. And he says the charges were sustained, okay, for neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming an officer, and being untruthful. His recommendation was termination, and that's what Stavros Anthony, Lieutenant, recommended to then Sheriff Jerry Keller. We know, we put this up on other podcasts. Those were the allegations, told a female officer to show them her genitals, and she did. The other officer forced her to eat crack cocaine, okay? And we know, and I already published this in previous podcasts, that's the results of the Internal Affairs Bureau investigation, the IAB, Internal Affairs Bureau. It says right there, okay? Charges sustained. Untruthfulness. Charges sustained. Neglect of duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer, okay? I'm not going to keep saying that, especially in this podcast. That is a given. Those charges remain to this day. He was sustained of those charges. He was never cleared. He was never exonerated, whatever word Lombardo wants to use. And one more thing, Jennifer Clampett never recanted or changed her story on the fact that she witnessed Kevin McMahill ordering Carrie Lance to show them her vagina. She lifted up the skirt and she showed them to the officers, and that never changed in Jennifer Clampett's testimony. I have her testimony in civil court, and I have some records from the pre-termination hearing that I'll post in upcoming podcasts. But what I'm saying, she didn't recant anything, you know? If little bits and pieces of things change when people are testifying or talking about something, that happens all the time. Doesn't mean not being untruthful. But the main point is, and you'll hear the attorney ask her in the pre-termination hearing, did you tell Sergeant Mark Tavares, who was the Internal Affairs Bureau Sergeant who conducted the investigation, that Kevin McMahill asked Carrie Lance to show them her vagina? And she says yes. She's never recanted anything, okay? So I want to make that clear, okay? The other thing he's talking about, he doesn't know anything about the records. You know, maybe they were purged. I don't know. I wasn't part of it. Ladies and gentlemen, I said this in another podcast. Documentary filmmaker, award-winning documentary filmmaker, Ramsey Dennison, who directed and produced the documentary in 2017 that was released, What Happens in Las Vegas. He's the one that brought to light in modern times the incident with McMahill. It's in that documentary. And as a result of that, in my writings for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, and then when I started my podcast, I was talking about this, okay? Now, in 2021, last year, Ramsey Dennison made a short video. Again, it's specifically about Kevin McMahill and the incident with Carrie Lance and Stoops forcing her to eat crack cocaine. That came out, I think, in August of 2021. I talked about it on my podcast. As a matter of fact, in several podcasts, even recently this year, I called Kevin McMahill out on it. And I said, sooner or later, he's going to have to address this incident that happened in 1995. He's going to have to address it. My point being is this. Sheriff Joe Lombardo and Kevin McMahill were fully aware that this was in the public domain and on social media since 2017. Now, more recently, I did 3 podcasts, and I think this is the 4th one I'm doing now, on the McMahill incident. On March 10th, like I said, and I posted the links to their articles in one of the other podcasts I did, the Las Vegas Review-Journal did the story about this, okay, March 10th. And they did a follow-up story. I've done 3 or 4 podcasts. Now, Sheriff Joe Lombardo, the highest law enforcement officer in Clark County, the head of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, is sitting there to the public. In essence, when you're talking to a reporter, press, you're talking to the public. And he wants us to believe, he says, well, I'll have to check the records because people have to have confidence in me. But maybe they were purged. Really, Lombardo, you want us to believe that you didn't go back way before even 2022 and say, you should have. He is my undersheriff. I need to do a complete background on him because all this stuff is out there. And everybody's telling me Joe Lombardo was fully aware of what Kevin McMahill did around the time that he did it. So that's what sources are telling me, okay? But even if that's not true, okay, when the Ramsey Dennison documentary came out in 2017, if Joe Lombardo wasn't the corrupt, lying, incompetent sheriff that he is, he would have said, hold on, guys, we need to do an internal affairs investigation, get these documents, get these records, and I need to find out what's going on. Because if indeed that happened 20-something years ago, I can't have this guy as my undersheriff because, number one, he could open up the department to civil action if he engaged in that type of conduct with a female 30 years ago, and if indeed it was sustained, that's an issue. And we know it was sustained. But he wants us to believe in that interview that he didn't investigate anything. And now he's saying, well, the confidence in the system, yeah, I'll go back and I'll look at the records, but they're probably purged. This guy is a documented liar, and he's corrupt. And he's defending and supporting and endorsing his number 2, Kevin McMahill, his undersheriff, because Kevin McMahill is also corrupt and is also a documented liar and a documented pervert by the own police department's Internal Affairs Bureau investigation. Okay? They sustained the charges. There's no debate that those charges, they weren't unsustained, they were sustained. The problem is, I know, but nobody else knows right now, why did he keep his job? Okay? That is the question, and I have the answer to that, and I'm going to put that in a future podcast because I want to do these small podcasts instead of going for an hour and a half. But the point being is this video right now is about Sheriff Joe Lombardo. The man you just heard, that interview was about 2 days ago with the Nevada Independent, and that reporter that was in there, the gentleman, he asked the question I would have asked, but I would have went further. He said, well, you're the sheriff. You can look at these documents and release them. And then Lombardo didn't know what to say. He says, well, I'll have to look into it, and, if I'm confident, people need to be confident in me, and I'll look at it, but they probably were purged, okay? And I would have told him, wait a minute, Sheriff. You mean to tell us, the public, right now, and us 3 reporters, that before you sat down for this interview, you never investigated the allegations that you said you heard about? He admitted he heard about them. Well, rumor. When it happened, there was rumor. I didn't know, but I heard things. So when you became sheriff and you endorsed, you kept him, Kevin McMahill was already undersheriff under Doug Gillespie, but he didn't have to keep him as undersheriff. He could have said, no, you're going back to captain or whatever you wanted to do with him. But he's going to let us believe right now, as you would heard him say, that he did absolutely no investigation on Kevin McMahill. Ladies and gentlemen, I said this in the other podcast, okay? Joe Lombardo is endorsing and defending Kevin McMahill because he has to. Because Kevin McMahill, according to my police sources, who's been speaking to me for years, and even more recently since McMahill announced he's running for sheriff, was behind all Joe Lombardo's cover-ups, okay? Cover-ups of falsifying police reports and I got more information on a high-ranking police official who gave me more information on that the other day, and the cover-ups of the rape of the 12-year-old girl in 2019, the cover-up that nobody investigated. I broke that story of the lieutenant who built the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for thousands of dollars by not showing up to work. I've been breaking one story after another, and many more that I've already talked about and wrote about even in the Baltimore Post-Examiner. Kevin McMahill was complicit in all these cover-ups with Joe Lombardo, okay? Joe Lombardo has no choice but to support and endorse him for sheriff, because Kevin McMahill, if he has no integrity, he's a documented liar to the police department, sustained. He's a documented pervert, sustained to the police department, and he's corrupt because he was complicit with Lombardo in all these cover-ups. So there you have it, folks. You know, that's what it is. I just want to reiterate what they brought up, the officer, Jennifer Clampett. Okay, that's the officer they're referring to. She never recanted her story that she was there and she witnessed McMahill and Stoops' conduct that day. She's always said, yes, he said it, the other guy did it. And by the way, when I brought up that paper I had on the document I had on the screen the other day, you saw, you saw on the document, those charges were sustained by then Sergeant of Internal Affairs, Mark Tavares. He said he interviewed Carrie Lance, and she corroborated what Jennifer Clampett said. All three officers were given a polygraph examination. Jennifer Clampett, William Stoops, and Kevin McMahill. Jennifer Clampett's polygraph came back truthful. Stoops and McMahill's polygraph results came back deceptive. Carrie Lance corroborated the events as they happened. The charges were sustained. He was found guilty of those charges. Those departmental charges, he was found guilty, okay, of those charges by Internal Affairs. The pre-termination board, all they're doing is saying, should he get terminated or should he get some other type of discipline? And then they make that recommendation to the sheriff, and the sheriff doesn't have to abide by anything that the pre-termination board says. If they say we think he should still be fired, the sheriff could say, I don't think so. I'm going to give him some type of discipline. They could say, we think he should get 2 weeks or a month with no pay. The sheriff can go back and say, I'm not going to agree with you. I think this is serious, and he should be terminated. Yes, Kevin McMahill should have been terminated, but he was not. Now, it just turned 2 minutes after midnight, so now we're into Friday, April 1st, 2022. And this is not a joke, lady. I'm going to get the jokes about that when this thing comes out, April 1st, and it's a joke. Everybody knows me. When I don't joke about stuff like this. This is not a joke. This is happening. 2 minutes after midnight, we're now at Friday, April 1st, 2022. Okay? According to information that I received, and I believe it is correct, today, Friday, April 1st, 2022, KLAS-TV, 8 News Now, from what I understand, at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. Okay, 1700 and 1800 hours Pacific time. That's 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock p.m. our time. And I believe they have an internet website where I think you could see these news broadcasts live as they happen. It's my understanding that today at 5 and 6, they are going to have segments on the Kevin McMahill 1995 incident. And it's my understanding that they interviewed Carrie Lance and they interviewed Jennifer Clampett and maybe others. And parts of those interviews, is my understanding, are going to be aired today, because now it's like I said, it's already Friday. It's 3 minutes after midnight. Today, KLAS-TV, 8 News Now in Las Vegas, 5 and 6. So we have to see what they're going to say. But I know it. They can't say anything else, but Jennifer Clampett is going to say, yeah, I witnessed it. That's what happened. And Carrie Lance is going to say, yeah, it happened to me. I'm hoping. I don't know. I didn't see the interview. Because we know those charges were sustained 27 years ago, whatever it is, 26, 27 years ago. So that's what's going on today. Now, I'm going to shut this down here in a couple of minutes. I get a lot of police sources. They give me a lot of information. And being that they're saying Joe Lombardo refuses, as does Kevin McMahill, to let me interview them. And it's never going to happen, okay? But they said some questions for Joe Lombardo, according to these police sources, okay? Sheriff Lombardo, have you ever used the N-word when describing black people? Okay? And I don't mean any disrespect by calling them African Americans. I don't believe in hyphenated, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Afro Americans. We're all Americans. Some our skin color is dark, some are light. So white people, black people, Hispanic, whatever. That's what they wanted me to ask them. Ask Sheriff Lombardo. You're not going to go and get an answer. But if I was doing an interview, I would ask him this question, according to my sources. Have you ever used the N-word describing black people? Have you, and I never heard this term before, and I'm going to say now, have you ever used the term mudshock when referring to white women who date black men? Mudshock. I've never heard that, but that's what they told me to say. Okay? Another thing. Joe Lombardo mentioned that he worked in narcotics undercover, and from my sources telling me he was about useless. But they're saying, does Joe Lombardo, Sheriff Lombardo, would you let me interview you about your time in narcotics? Because my sources had mentioned several names to me about some, the best way I could put is impropriety relating to your involvement in the narcotics section with monies. So I'm supposed to say that, and I said it. And the other thing is, while you were a field training officer, at any time, did you ever stop the car, tell your trainee, your recruit, to get behind the wheel, and then you got in the back seat of the cruiser where you had a prisoner of darker skin and tuned them up? And that's what they want me to tell you. That's what I'm asking. I'm asking that question. You want to answer these things? You can answer them to me, or you can answer them to your friends in the media out here in Las Vegas. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I got a lot of stuff coming out. Some stuff is just mind-boggling to me. Kevin McMahill was sustained on the charge of neglect of duty. And he did a lot of things and signed a lot of papers, like I said yesterday, on people who did worse things that he did, less things that he did worse. And he put his signature on termination papers and suspension papers and disciplinary stuff like that. But there's one thing I'm going to talk about. I don't know if I'm going to talk about the next podcast or when, but very soon, is when he wanted somebody brought up on charges of neglect of duty, and the guy was a good cop, and this guy was exonerated. They said it was a bunch of bullshit. The charges were not sustained, and I'm going to talk about that because I'm not going to get into it now, but it was disgraceful. Okay, because unlike that guy, Kevin McMahill's charges, ladies and gentlemen, were sustained in 1995 by the Internal Affairs Bureau for neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming an officer, and untruthfulness. He is a documented liar, and he's a documented pervert. That's all I'm going to say. Remember, hit the red subscribe button if you don't already subscribe to my channel, because you will not see. Hopefully now Channel 8 is going to do something on this afternoon. So finally they're coming around and doing something on stuff that I talked about and then other people talked about with the McMahill incident. So that's good, but we have to see what they're going to say in their news segments. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you can. I know times are hard. I don't expect people to do it, but if you want to support my independent investigative journalism, it's paypal.me/Doug Poppa. And then, of course, audio podcasts are all over the place. Google Podcasts, old podcasts. Some of them, most of them are on Spreaker. More currently, 1 to 107, when this is finished, are on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Radio Public. Appreciate you listening. Remember, the stuff that I am talking about is coming from police personnel, law enforcement personnel. It's not stuff that's just coming off the top of my head. And Sheriff Lombardo and Kevin McMahill or anybody else that I mention in these podcasts have an open mic at any time if you want to come on and defend yourself and say, listen, this is nonsense, this is not true, people are saying stuff and it's not true. You have that option to do it anytime you want. And so the mic is open, and I keep saying that. And obviously you guys aren't man enough, you at McMahill, to come on to my show, and let's iron this stuff out so we can get down to brass tacks and find out exactly just what the hell's been going on in your tenure, Sheriff Lombardo, and in Kevin McMahill's tenure. And like I said all the time, ladies and gentlemen, Joe Lombardo is unworthy of the office of governor of Nevada. He is corrupt, he is a documented liar, and he is incompetent. And Kevin McMahill has no business even running for the office of Clark County Sheriff, which would put him in charge of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department if he wins the election, okay? He is a documented liar by the Las Vegas Metro Police Internal Affairs Bureau. He is a documented pervert by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Internal Affairs Bureau, and then on other things that I confirmed and I've talked about that I said he is a documented liar, and I've proved that. It's 10 minutes after midnight, April 1st, 2022, Friday. This is Doug Poppa from the desert of Las Vegas. Ladies and gentlemen, you all have a good night. I'll see you on my next episode.